very quickly to give you a little bit of an update on what's been happening within the R2C and some of the things that we've been working on. You recall several months ago that we became a member with GCOM, which is the Global Covenant of Mayors. We recently were contacted and requested to come to Kansas City. That was funded in part by the European Union, essentially to bring the U.S. city metro regions together along with a partner local government to exchange ideas, commit to best practices, and how we can accelerate the work all together. So we went out there, or I went out there to Kansas City along with the Chicago metro region, and my slide is messed up there, but we were joined by 6 other regions in the country. We had a full day of exercises that we participated in, exchanging ideas, presentations, how are you doing this? And what's interesting, we were joined later the second day with IURC countries, which is the International Urban and Regional Cooperation Group, which is an additional group. And the countries that came along with that group, we are all doing the same work, essentially, everywhere across the world. We're all approaching it a little bit differently, but all have the same goals in mind. So our region, I think, is exactly on target and on track where we should be. We need to accelerate our work as much as possible, but that exchange was really wonderful. We met, just as a little bit of a side note, because I love history, Union Station in Kansas City was the hub of the U.S. Like all the trains met there, and it was the site of the 1933 Kansas City massacre, because it was overrun with mob bosses at the time, right? So like the Bonnie and Clyde were there, and all of these crazy mob bosses, including one called the Barker Gang, which hopefully is no relation to Courtney Barker, which will be speaking later to you all in another portion of our program. But beautiful building. We were able to have meetings all day there in that building, and there's still bullet holes on the outside that you can see. It was really quite fascinating. Some of the things that I had mentioned, these are other cities. St. Paul, Minnesota is down there and with their partner Twin City region, and it was really very fascinating. In this region, we only have 2 cities that have joined GCOM, one being the city of Orlando and the other the city of Apopka. Neither of them were able to participate in the event as it occurred. So we were joined by Miami-Dade County that went with us because we do similar work to their compact down there. Another thing we've been working on, we just passed the Partnership for the Goals event, where we really we had several partners. It was us, the foundation, UCF, Orlando, Orange County, and then some businesses that were engaged with Florida for Good and outside of Florida for Good. But really to use the SDG framework as a nobody owned that conversation, and we brought all of these leaders together across all of these different organizations with the intent to kind of break outside of business as usual. Nobody had their organizational hats on, but let's all work together to work on items within the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that are all interconnected. What are the best things that we can do to move forward in our region? How can we all work on them together? Let's come up with something that we can all work towards in a 12 to 18 month time period. We had a significant number. This is just a handful of organizations. Their executive directors showed up. Their CEOs showed up of some of these companies, and really engaged in idea creation. It was a pretty amazing event. I unfortunately was sick and not able to attend, which was a drag, but nonetheless, this just happened May 5th and 6th. With regards to the work with the Resilient Florida funding that Julie had mentioned earlier within our budget, we're wrapping that up. I don't know how to do that. We're wrapping all of that work up, and it is due at the end of June. The new cycle is already open, so I am very interested in ideas that you might have that your city and or county wants to move forward, that we can fold into some type of regional project or program to help move you all forward. We did do some projects to implement the information that we put into our Strategic Regional Action Plan or Resilience Action Plan. We've identified, and expanded a program that we already had existing in Brevard and Volusia County into Orange County with Stetson and identifying priority natural resource areas. You'll hear a little bit later about our housing needs and resilience policy audit, which we called HARP, both section of those programs, which really identified what kind of housing stock that we have here currently, be it regular housing, assisted affordable housing, naturally occurring affordable housing, mobile homes, and how they're going to be impacted by flooding all across our entire region. And then we did a policy audit with Orange County that you'll hear about later. We're currently working with all of your emergency management directors to define a methodology to really understand how to integrate all of the threats that we have with the vulnerabilities that we know are coming down the pipeline, in addition to social vulnerabilities, and then look at the severity of consequences from an emergency management perspective. And we'll see vulnerabilities across the region in a new way, potentially for the first time when we move that forward. And then we also are completing nature-based solution education material. To bring us now to our next two presentations, you'll recall at our last meeting in January, I presented to you all the greenhouse gas inventory final results. We talked about the science-based target that we now have for the region, but 2030 we want to reduce our emissions by 54.3%. And then we talked about the high impact actions that we identified, 5 of them in our region, and how we are going to accelerate it, because the way that we're functioning right now and the level of our commitments only get us halfway to that 54.3% science-based target by 2030. So you all had requested to understand return on investments that happened and are occurring around the region. So I'd like to introduce Ashley with the City of Orlando, and then Courtney Barker, again, no relation that we know of to those mob bosses, with the City of Satellite Beach, and they're both going to be talking to you about return on investments with their fleet, and changing that over to electric in some cases, and then solar investments in the case. So Ashley Bonstone.
All right, good morning everyone, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to spend some time with you. As Jennifer mentioned, my name is Ashley Van Stone. I'm one of the Sustainability Program Managers with the City of Orlando's Office of Sustainability and Resilience. And just for a little bit of historical context, or perhaps a refresher for some of you, the Greenworks Initiative is Mayor Dyer's signature sustainability focus for the city at large. It was established in 2007 and has grown considerably since then, and really focuses on 7 key kind of issue areas under the umbrella of sustainability and resilience. And really all of the efforts and priorities that we set under those pillars are to think about the impacts of climate change and environmental degradation on public health, on the vitality and resilience of our local economy and the communities that our residents live, work, and play in, as well as then thinking about fiscal stewardship and operational sustainability. We have a number of different goals that, again, fall under this umbrella of Greenworks, but our 3 kind of very climate-oriented ones are around greenhouse gases, energy use and sourcing, and then electrification of our fleet. And so we have a goal to reduce emissions by 90% by the year 2040 and 100% within the decade after. That associated goal for renewables is to power the city completely on renewable energy 100% by 2050, and with an interim goal of powering all city facilities and operations 100% by 2030. And then we also have a goal to fully convert our fleet to electric or alternative fuel vehicles to 100% by the end of this decade. And that's also a goal that we're currently revisiting, I would note. So we're in the middle of updating our municipal plan, which we do every 5 years. And as you know, you may have seen from all the different coverage over the last year or two, especially electrification of the auto market has evolved very rapidly, and it's really the direction it's much more concertedly going, and seeing, as Jennifer mentioned, return on investments, and particularly looking at the true life cycle costs of those vehicles. So that's actually something that we're revisiting in terms of even focusing more on the electrification front of that fleet. When it comes to thinking about our built environment, so in our greenhouse gas inventory, about 80% of our footprint as a city is within our built environment, so within the buildings that we operate and own, as well as everything comprised in the city from commercial, multifamily, and then your singular residential. And so we really kind of approach all of our work through this pyramid, starting at the very bottom of conservation, where can we actually be using less energy, and then efficiency being that really, really core chunk in the middle. So how can we make sure we're using the most up-to-date technology for our lighting, our cooling, our other electrical systems, things like building automation to really make the most of the energy that we are using and that we're operating as efficiently as possible, which also ends up being the most economical way to operate, right? And then finally, once we've accomplished that within our facilities, thinking about how we can power those remaining needs as cleanly as possible. So as a kind of ancillary goal to that emissions reduction, we have a target of a 20% reduction in overall energy consumption by 2040. And so far, we've already exceeded that, which is pretty phenomenal. And so over the last few years, as we've invested a lot into energy efficiency retrofits and upgrades, we're actually seeing about an average of 23% reduction in those operations. And again, this is also thinking about, as we're expanding and growing as a city. So both new construction as well as the renovations to our existing facilities, holding that standard at 20% or higher. Solar has been an area where we have led significantly over the past few years. I often get asked how we've been able to do so much, and I don't mean for that to come off as not humble, but it's really because the city is so supportive of this, because it is something that the city really embraces as smart for the resilience of our community, for our facilities, and for our operations, to make sure that we continue to provide the services that we need to and can continue to thrive and excel beyond that basic provisioning. And so a couple of years ago, we worked with the National Renewable Energy Lab, as well as a few other partners, to really develop a solar roadmap for the city. So looking at all of our owned facilities, assessing feasibility for on-site installation, which primarily means rooftop solar for us, and considering which of those facilities are going to have the highest ROI, which ones are the best suited for any number of reasons. And I think I have that as the next slide, or one coming up shortly after. And so our solar strategy basically takes the shape of two key forms: those on-site installations, where we're installing those photovoltaic panels on our own facilities and generating that power on-site, and then the other being subscribing to community solar through local utilities. And so as part of that solar roadmap development, there were a couple key factors that were looked at across all of these facilities. So some very fundamental prerequisites, thinking about feasibility on existing structures, but then also thinking about design standards and architecture approaches for new facilities. So an example I often give is we've been adding rooftop solar to all of our fire stations. Our newer fire stations, the roofs are built very differently to be flat, very amenable to maximizing that rooftop space for installation, painting them with white paint so they're more reflective, which helps both with the energy efficiency of the building, as well as then upping that radiance factor for the solar so it's producing even more. Thinking about the current resilience of the infrastructure itself. So which buildings are in need of a new roof, or what does that horizon look like? If a building is going to need a new roof in the next 2 to 5 years, we don't want to install solar on it in that same time frame. So it's helping us to also then do those other elements of capital planning, so that way we can kind of do all of that in the proper sequence to get those facilities ready for those installations, with having that full purview of the needs across all of those buildings. Economically, looking at the total cost and rate of return, and then, sorry, could you go back one more, Jennifer? And then other contributing factors. So thinking about how our strategy can try to start unfolding these projects across the city in an equal and equitable way, so where these buildings are located, not kind of starting all in one district and then moving on to the next. Again, kind of looking at all of these different factors in tandem. Visibility, which shouldn't necessarily be the dominating factor, but is important because it helps to create that consciousness for both other community members and residents around the work that we're doing and continue to build the support and buy-in and understanding to maintain the momentum that we've been able to get and keep it moving forward. Great. So some recap of some of the projects that we've installed on-site solar for. One of our largest installations is at our Fleet and Facilities compound that's over in the Paramore area. Again, a lot of flat, reflective rooftop space, so we're able to offset a significant portion of the facility's energy needs with that rooftop installation. All of our fire stations, so really also thinking about the importance of reliability and resilience for our 24/7 high energy use emergency response facilities. And then a number of community centers that we're continuing to add projects to. One I will highlight is our Fleet and Facilities carport, so that's something that we were recently exploring. And as we think about ROI and things like that, we actually have had to put this project on pause because of the cost of steel. So there's a lot of factors right now that are making, in some ways, certain solar projects much more amenable and the value proposition stronger each day, and then others that can sometimes see the effects of some of the supply chain cost rises that we've all been experiencing lately. And then in terms of off-site solar, so those subscriptions, so City Hall, for example, not a great site for rooftop installation. It has a domed roof. There's just not really kind of the right architecture to make the most there. So that is a facility that we subscribe through OUC's community solar program. And as there has been a proposition to increase the fuel base rate to possibly take effect next June, the cost of the community solar subscriptions will almost be even with that fuel rate. It's a very, very marginal difference, and we expect that it'll eventually start to go in the other direction as more and more of those community solar farms and sources come online. The cost of that solar will continue to come down, and presumably the cost of that fuel, which is still not internalizing all the external costs associated with burning fossil fuels, continues to go up. In terms of our fleet, so like I said, our goal is by the end of this decade to have all of our fleet either alternative fueled or electric. And so we have started a little bit smaller in terms of electrification, really been using the past few years to test different technologies, to get familiar with them, to consider training and education needs for our staff and our maintenance techs, making sure that we consider what are the infrastructure needs to support this in terms of charging on site, so that way there are no disruption to services. So this one has been a little bit slower going because there are different factors like that to consider and make sure that we can incorporate all of these elements, again, in the right sequence and in tandem so that we can scale that accordingly over time. But these pilots have been really insightful to understand, again, those training needs, both for the drivers and users as well as our maintenance staff. And right now, certainly, as you look at the costs of EVs continuing to come down, which we'll anticipate will continue to be the case as more and more models come on the market. Almost every major auto manufacturer at this point has pledged to convert their fleet almost fully to electric vehicles by a certain time over the next 10, 15 to 20 years. They all have a slightly different horizon. Just more of those options are becoming available. So we have 2 Ford F-150 Lightnings that will be coming soon once those roll off, that we're, again, excited to kind of pilot and then make sure that we're scaling that up appropriately and making sure that those charging infrastructure needs are in place. And then we've also worked with our partners at Lynx on starting to electrify their fleet. So partnering together on pursuing grants and other funding opportunities to start with converting the limo downtown circulator to fully electric. So that has been in motion. There are, I believe, currently 8 electric buses in the rotation now, with another 6 to come online by the end of this year. And the goal is for 100%, I think, by mid-decade. So they're trending to be ahead of meeting that mark well before that actual milestone. And working with them currently on some additional funding opportunities to now start thinking about how do we electrify the fixed route fleet as well. So we recently published our city council adopted our electric mobility roadmap, which was a collaborative effort developed from stakeholders throughout the Central Florida region, thinking about what does the transformation of mobility look like over the next decade, both to help people move around better, for it to be more accessible, more affordable, but also cleaner. And so there are a number of different goals and milestones captured within that, and Lynx has been a tremendous partner in thinking through how we can continue to clean the transportation sector. And thank you. I'm happy to, if there's time, I'm not sure what the time check is, if anyone has any questions.
Thank you so much. If there are questions, yeah.
For rooftop solar, are you using vendors or are you doing that in-house?
So we do contract all of that out. One thing I meant to note, but I did not, that you may all be familiar with is here in Florida, we can't take advantage of things like a power purchase agreement. So we do purchase and own all of the installations that are on our facilities. With a power purchase agreement, we'd essentially be able to lease our rooftop space, and the installation and maintenance would all be handled outside. But we do outsource the actual design, construction, and then ongoing maintenance of those.
And then in general, how many years payback to get to payback?
It varies a lot. So what our energy manager said to me is like, it averages about 12 years, but that continues to change over time, both as, again, the cost is coming down, the cost of alternative sources of energy, like your standard fuel, are going up. And so, things are continuing to work in the favor of solar, including then how we're designing our new facilities and thinking about from the start how we can maximize solar potential of those. So for some of our older buildings that may have more pitched roofs, and you don't have as much square footage to install panels, the ROI is going to be less on those because you're not able to maximize the roof space as, say, a newer building where we went with a flat approach and can get significantly more capacity.
Okay, yeah, I'd be interested for our county just to think about some of the low-hanging fruit just to get started as a pilot.
Yeah, and we'd be happy to, kind of go into much more detail on some of those specific projects and kind of help talk through some of those nuances. The solar roadmap that was developed is available online, so I can, make sure to share that link with Jennifer and make sure that gets to everyone as well, and kind of talks through some of those different factors that kind of hurt or hinder the different levels of feasibility and return.
Any other questions? Yeah, Mr. Parks.
Yeah, it's just, so I know that you don't have so much control or little control over where this great technology is made, but if we're going this way, both locally, regionally, and as a nation, though, where it's made is going to be important. So is there any emphasis on trying to use made in America, made locally first, even though you might be limited, obviously, at this point, but that seems like from a policy standpoint, that would be pretty important.
Yeah, there are limitations to that based on kind of what is broadly available, where it's being produced, as you said, but also just, our procurement process and current policies there in terms of, kind of putting things out for bid and how different types of quotes and projects are evaluated. But what I would say is I think there's increasing emphasis on things like that in terms of how we may partner with our counterparts in our economic development department or entities outside the city of, how can we maybe even attract some of that here? There's been a lot, I think, more movement on that in the air mobility space and kind of attracting that to the city. But things like electric vehicle charging infrastructure manufacturer, electric vehicle manufacturer, solar panels, so, maybe even more than just domestic production, but how can we even try to court maybe some of that business to set up shop here, and then provide other, workforce development and economic development opportunities.
Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you. I think we also have someone from Satellite Beach. So we have Orlando.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think one of the fabulous things about the council is we have large cities and organizations like Orlando, and then scalable opportunities for other organizations. It's helpful because we're not all Orlando, right?
Hi. Well, thank you for having me today. I'm Courtney Barker, the city manager for the city of Satellite Beach. And we're much smaller. We're about 11,300 people, as Minnie's probably told you 100 times. But we started our sustainability program back in 2015. And it would, in our city, a lot of our sustainability projects are very much geared towards the water quality. We're surrounded by both the ocean and the Indian River Lagoon. So a lot of our efforts have been really in that realm. However, when we were looking at water quality, especially for the lagoon, atmospheric deposition accounts for the third largest pollutant source for the lagoon. And so that's where emissions becomes a personal issue for our residents when they start realizing that the correlation between emissions and water quality. Because water quality is something they can see every day. It's in their backyard. But what they don't see is the problems with emissions, and those are not something they really see every day in their busy lives, but they can see the condition of the lagoon. And so when we start explaining that to them and why cleaner energy is so important, that's something that really strikes a chord with them. So we've only got so far one solar project in our community right now, and that's on our City Hall complex. Some of the lessons that you heard from the City of Orlando, we actually ran into and made some of those mistakes. With our City Hall, where's the little clicker thingy? Oh, there you go ahead. Yeah, with our solar, our City Hall was built in the late 50s, and so when we decided to put solar on City Hall, we had the roof inspected, and they said, oh yeah, you got 20 more years, and we said, okay, cool. And so we went out and put the solar on. And then about 2 years later, we started renovating one half of the building and realized that there was damage to the roof that nobody could see until you took the roof apart. So we actually had to take it all down and reapply it or put it back on. So you can see, if you go to the next slide, you can see where we had to take it down, and then we put it back on, and you can see the substantial savings in costs for electricity when we put solar on. Our solar has basically given us pretty much a little over 5% return on investment so far. So for us and for the City Council, when we were looking at solar, we're really looking at it from an environmental standpoint, but we also don't want to lose money. And here we are actually saving money with solar, and that's a good thing. And this is also, these costs also factored in the fact that we had to take it down and put it back on, and those costs have been factored in as well. So we are actually doing pretty well. We do have several buildings right now that we are renovating and getting new roofs, and all of those buildings, when we do the bids for new roofs, it all has to be solar ready, and then we begin programming the solar for those buildings. And so we have 2 buildings right now. One is our old fire station that will be going out to bid for a new roof, and we'll be putting solar on that shortly after. And then we also have our Public Works building that we just constructed, and that building will also be getting solar around the same time, so we'll be bidding out that together. So in terms of electric vehicles, we have only been able to switch out some of our administrative vehicles, and so far we've only done that with 2. However, and this is still the solar, by the way, we rent lease all of our vehicles from Enterprise for Public Works, and that's our largest fleet. And they're telling us about basically next year we'll be getting a fleet of electric trucks. So we're excited about that. Hopefully that will stay on target. And we are right now assessing all of our facilities for charging stations. We're building our environmental team quite a bit in this past year. We started out with 1 environmental coordinator. Then we hired a city biologist. Now we just hired a resiliency and sustainability officer. And in about 2 months, we'll be hiring a planning and sustainability director. And that director will be over all of the environmental teams. So we're very excited about that as well. So we're kind of building our staff, and in doing that, building our capacity to do these large-scale analysis of our facilities, getting ready for the electric vehicles, doing all of those analysis to make sure that we are building that into our operations and it's convenient for the staff. The charging stations are located in the right spot. for the right types of vehicles and so on. So that's pretty much where we're at in terms of those types of projects. We have a gazillion other sustainability projects that are more water quality related and environmental habitat related, things like that, but we're focusing on emissions today, so I kept it short. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Yes.
That was with NASA? Yeah, so we did basically analysis of all the rooftops in the city to see if, where the best locations were. So that helps our residents quite a bit when they come in for permitting for solar. And quite a few of our residents have solar, and we're starting to do that analysis right now of, kind of tracking that and mapping it. But that's resource is what we did that for. So they can come in and view that map to see if their home, considering tree coverage and location and stuff like that, is a good candidate for solar.
That's awesome. Any other questions?
Are you looking at storage solutions yet? Battery? Store the solar? Battery tech? And have you looked at that at all?
No, we have not. We have not started that.
And what's really cool is when you're from Satellite Beach, you get to work with NASA.
I couldn't hear you.
You guys have a lot of cool things going on, but we have Buzz Aldrin lives in our city, just so you know. All right, so.
I'm impressed.
Just saying.
I'm impressed.
That's actually in the sustainability plan for that the city council adopted in 2016. We're actually updating that plan now, but yes, that is the policy of the council. They basically gave us direction to assess all the roofs, do that analysis, and then, program solar as soon as the roof is completed. And so but it is a lesson learned, I have to say, with City Hall. I mean, when you do have a building that old, even if you get a roofer to come out, sometimes you don't know. You don't know what you don't know, and sometimes they can't see those problems until the roof is, taken apart and being redone. So, so that's, kind of a chance you take with a building that old. And, no matter, regardless of how new the roof is, when you have a building that was built in the late 50s, you might still have problems with that. So, that is a lesson learned.
Sorry, sort of just as much of a question as a comment. We utilize net metering on our rooftop solar, correct? I'm assuming Orlando does too? We take advantage of it?
Except our panels don't generate the full need for the City Hall.
But for example, like during the weekends when we're closed and things like that,
Yes,
during like daylight
then
time,
yes.
so there was a bill that went through and made it all the way to the governor's desk where they were trying to do away with the net metering, and thank goodness he vetoed it, and it worked its way through the whole gamut. And I would imagine that we might see that again. So that's something everyone needs to consider, because it not only was really bad for the environmental aspect of moving people to solar, the residential side, but it was a small business killer. And it was really, really disappointing, because we were in, it was one of those bills we just kind of fell upon, because we were in for I think it was 280. We were in this, 280 was the Senate, or was 620 the Senate?
Yeah.
But
That would-
anyways, we were in it, and the whole solar industry came out, and they were explaining, you you guys are about small business and income and all of that, and it was shocking how many people voted for that bill. I mean, mind you, it was his first stop, and we knew it would get changed, but I mean, that I imagine we're going to see that again. It's going to be a battle we're going to fight.
Yeah,
And
so
it's
FPL
unfortunate.
actually, a long time ago, when they were asking for a rate increase, I went to the Public Service Commission meeting and complained that they should not get rate increases until they start investing in solar. And so now, every time they have a solar bill, I get a phone call and a personal meeting, so I don't complain about them. But I did get a meeting about that bill. their logic is that the net metering includes franchise fees, taxes, and all of that, those costs that aren't associated with the cost of producing the electricity. And that net metering should just be only the cost of the electricity and not all of these other costs. And that was their logic behind that. The problem with it is that right now, there's finally a return on investment with solar, and it's now a time when a lot of people are investing in it. And without the net metering that we have today, that may make many of the solar projects out there not feasible. So that was the concern of ours is, sure, you have some logic there, but right now is a really bad time to pass that bill.
Right. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.